According to the U.S. Department of State, since 2005, there's been an estimated 50,000 people being trafficked into the U.S. annually. Now, human trafficking is a subject that we tend to associate with other parts of the world, but it will surprise a lot of you to learn that cases for human trafficking have been reported in all 50 states of the U.S. And as citizens, it's important for all of you to know what's going on in your country. So for that same reason, being a citizen myself, I decided to research this topic, and now I feel it's my job to share with you some of the things that I've come across while researching this topic. So learning about human trafficking will expose you to some of the threats that are facing our country every year. Today I'll be discussing 3 types of human trafficking, starting with sex trafficking in the US, then I'll move on to slave labor, and I'll end with child trafficking. So while most sex trafficking does occur internationally, the US is seeing a rise in the number of cases of sex trafficking. According to Amanda Walker and Rodney Hill in the 2011 article posted in the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, they say that human sex trafficking is the fastest growing business of organized crime and the 3rd largest criminal enterprise in the world. One example of this growth is a case that occurred in 2008. A man named Corey Davis was sentenced to 298 months in prison for the organization of a sex ring that spanned over 3 states, which included the exploitation of over 20 women, some of whom were underage, so they were minors, under the age of 18. Now, the media sometimes gives an idea that false idea of what sex trafficking or prostitution is, like with movies, TV shows. They suggest that some women go into sex trafficking and prostitution as a job, like as a form of money. This is hardly ever the case. Victims can come in a variety of ways, whether it be undocumented immigrants, abandoned youth, or somebody who's just suffered severe trauma or abuse throughout their lives. Once roped into sex trafficking, victims will suffer either isolation, starvation, physical abuse, drug abuse, all in hopes for their captors to keep them from any attempt at escape. Now that I've explained a little bit about sex trafficking, let me move on to the second type of human trafficking, which is slave labor. One of the most intricate forms of slave labor is involuntary domestic slavery. This is a really intricate form of slave labor. What traffickers will do in this case is keep victims on private property, and by keeping them on private property, it makes it really hard for law enforcement to help victims, because they can't simply go into a building or any whatever location that they're being held on to search like they would in public property. They need to have strong cases in order to get search warrants and then be able to go and search to see if there's any evidence of actual trafficking. So the slave labor does have a targeted population, being undocumented immigrants. According to Chris Buckley in the 2005 entry in the Topical Research Digest, Human Rights and Contemporary Slavery Journal, there are an estimated 50,000 people in slave situations in the U.S. as of now. Keep in mind this was in 2005, so the number might be a little bit different, but it should be around the same. And the reason that immigrants are the targeted population is because when they arrive to the U.S., they arrive with either little to no money, no family to rely on, or they just suffer language barriers, so that makes them very desperate. So they take the first job opportunity that comes to them, whether it be something that they really don't want to get into. And once roped into labor, it's really hard for them to free themselves of it. Because they are here in the US illegally, captors will usually threaten them with deportation, and despite their current situation being very bad, a lot of victims would rather stay in the situation that they are in right now than go back to the country that they're from. So I've discussed sex trafficking and slave labor in the US, and now I'll move on to explain how that affects children. Human trafficking doesn't discriminate based on race, ethnicity, gender, or age. Some children that are pulled into prostitution can be as young as 9 years old. According to the U.S. Department of Human Services, a survey conducted by the Los Angeles Probation Department revealed that 59% of juveniles that were arrested based on prostitution charges were in the foster care system and recruited by pimps or by other traffickers. The reason being that because children have no family to rely on, it makes them very easy targets. Traffickers will often impose themselves on children, making themselves seem like somebody that they can rely on, a fatherly figure, any form of family, which makes them very trusting. And once they have the trust, that's when they put them into the sex trade, and things just kind of snowball from there. Forced labor with children can affect children as young as 4. They're put to work in factories, in restaurants, sometimes even schools. Some teachers will exploit their children for little to no pay. And the same as with the adults, children tend to be immigrants. In some cases, traffickers from the U.S. will actually travel to other parts of the world and or parts of the world, and they'll offer children better lives, allegedly better lives in the U.S. by offering them jobs. But before bringing them here, they start mounting expenses on them, the travel expenses that it'll take to bring them to the U.S. Once here, they'll tell them that they need to pay for food, for housing. So before even arriving to the U.S., these kids have already dug themselves into holes that they have no means of getting themselves out of. So I've discussed sex trafficking, slave labor, and how both of those forms of human trafficking affect children in the U.S. So now that I've discussed that, I hope I give you a better idea of how serious this problem actually is, because it is an ongoing problem in the U.S. And by informing yourselves a little bit more about it, you guys can help prevent it in the future. Thank you.